Okay, well, welcome everybody to this Old World Gems virtual tasting with Callum and myself, Tim Robbins at Nichols and Perks. We are delighted with the response that we've had to our virtual tasting events, and we will be continuing these even when lockdown is over, because it's a great way of getting people in touch with each other and with us who are unable, for various logistic reasons, to make the trek to Stourbridge to enjoy a tasting in our cellar. So let's just have a quick, I'll just admit the next few people in, and then I think we'll be up to speed. So this evening it's about Old World Gems, and we'll be talking through that wine by wine and a little bit of background as well. But in the first instance, I'd like to hand over to my esteemed co-host this evening, Callum. Welcome, Callum. Good evening.
Cheers,
and let's hear a bit about who we work for.
Yeah, Tim, how you doing? You okay?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you.
Still locked down with those curtains, I see.
Oh yes, indeed. Yes, they've not been opened today. I hide, so it's I have my own Englishman's home is this castle. So I've got a drawbridge and a moat,
nice curtains,
and a trebuchet ready to launch burning cauldrons of oil at any marauding intruders.
Okay, we'll crack on. So, hi guys, hope everyone's doing well. So we've got another really good number for this evening's tasting. Over 60 participants, which is great. And again, a lot of you are new to Nichols and Perks, so I'll just give it a bit of a small introduction to the company that Tim and I work for. We're located in Stourbridge, a small town in the West Midlands, and Nichols and Perks is actually one of the oldest wine and spirit merchants in the UK. In fact, the world, dating back to 1797, when William Nichols first began trading as a grocer, a druggist, and a wine and spirit merchant. Now, the company's actually been in my family since the mid-40s, 1945 to be exact, when it was purchased by my great-grandfather, William Gardner. There are now members of the third and fourth generations at the helm, with myself being a member of the fourth generation. Now, we're actually still located in the original 16th century premises you see before you. And this building was first leased by William Nichols for just 5 shillings per year. Now, the building's actually owned outright by the company. And as I say, to this day, holds our offices, a small retail shop, and our famous 16th century cellars. If you've not been to visit yet, you must. Now, with regards to the business, there are a lot of different layers and aspects to our business. But we are predominantly fine wine and spirit specialists with a keen focus on the wines of France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, etc. However, we do offer wines from all over the world, and we exported to well over 50 different countries last year alone. Now, as well as offering fine wine to private customers such as yourselves and other members of the trade, we also supply to the on-trade, so Michelin-star restaurants when they're open. We offer a fine wine investment program, offer fine wines as futures or en primeur. We actually host well over 100 different wine and spirits events every year, don't we, Tim?
We certainly do. Sometimes it feels like a bit more at the moment, but hey ho, that keeps us out of mischief.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that our company has a keen focus on the wines of France, Italy, Spain, etc. So these old world wines are very much a cornerstone of our business, and they're essentially the nucleus of Nichols and Perks. So for this reason, I'm actually delighted that we're showing these 5 excellent wines that we have in front of you. Looking forward to it, Tim.
Yeah, me too, Cal. Got a map here of what do we mean by old world. So it was a couple of points really to identify old world wine. First of all, geographically, the area in the middle of the top part of the screen there, you can see is basically the Middle East and Europe. So that's where the know-how was developed and exported around the region hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, from the origins in the Middle East. And old world wines tend to have a few characteristics. This is very much a rule of thumb, and obviously there's a bit of an overlap at the edges, but old world wines tend to have slightly lighter body with a little bit lower alcohol, higher acidity, a little less fruit forward, slightly more mineral flavors, compared with New World wines, which can be more often characterized as having slightly fuller body, a little bit more alcohol, lower acidity, and a more fruit forward tasting approach. Now, as I said, that there are overlaps and exceptions to those rules. One of the other things about old world wines is that they tend to have developed the know-how and techniques over many, many generations. And that often leads to quite tightly defined rules and regulations for how the wines should be produced, the grape varieties are used, the yields, and the geographical territories that are allowed to call certain wines certain names. New World wines, however, will tend to have fewer regulations, although there are attempts in both sides, sometimes to loosen some of the regulations on the Old World side and sometimes tighten them up to make them more classically orientated on the New World side. But that broad rule of thumb is something to kind of bear in mind. So let's have a quick look at how best to get the best out of the tasting event if you've not been to many wine tastings before. So we say sniff, swirl, and slurp. You probably already know by now that you get more information through your nose when you're sniffing a wine because of all the semi-volatile compounds that carry the complex flavors and aromas. And those will activate sensors in your olfactory bulb, which is this amazing connection between your brain and the back of your sinus, which will detect thousands and thousands of different aromas and flavors, far more than if you simply rely on your tongue. So give the wine a swirl. These are all red wines tonight, so it will take a little while to open up. So if you've got the fortitude and perseverance and self-discipline, you might like to keep a little bit of each sample and go back to it later on because it will open up and change a little bit. Take a really small sip first of all to kind of establish an equilibrium with your palate. I hope you've got a few nibbles to go with these wines because these wines, more so than some perhaps, really benefit from having some food to work with them. So once you've had your second sip, which is a little bit more of a tasting sip, then have a little nibble of the food that you've hopefully got to go alongside it, then go back and have another sip. And it's quite interesting to see how the wine is perceived after you've had some, before and after you've had some food. So we'll obviously look at that as we go through. We really welcome your comments as to how you are finding the wines, particularly if you're pairing it with some nibbles. So we have a little housekeeping announcement as well, which is a happy birthday. This is to happy birthday, Nigel Brooks. So
Happy birthday, Nigel.
Happy birthday to you, and hope you enjoy this evening. So let's go to the first wine, which is from Italy. It's one of the biggest wine regions in Italy, in fact, second only to Sicily. There's Sicily at the bottom of your screen there. We're actually going northwest to Piedmont, where you can see the capital is Turin. And the particular grape that we're going to be sampling tonight is the Nebbiolo grape. There it is. It's thought to derive its name from the Italian nebbia, meaning fog, as in nebulous. During harvest, which generally takes place relatively late in October, you get quite a deep, intense fog around the region where the Nebbiolo vineyards are mostly located. But there's always two or three other alternative explanations. So one of them refers to the kind of slightly foggy like veil that forms over the berries as they reach maturity. I think that photo demonstrates that phenomenon quite well there. Or a third idea is that the name is maybe derived instead from the Italian word nobile, meaning noble. So Nebbiolo produces lightly colored red wines in the main, which can be fairly tannic in their youth and have a wide variety of aromas going from the sort of light floral, rosy type of aromas right the way through to rich, tarry flavors. As they age, they tend to take on characteristic brick orange hue at the rim of the glass if you tip your glass, and they mature to reveal other aromas and flavors such as violets, wild herbs, cherries, raspberries. And then on the more savory end, truffles, a little bit of tobacco, dried fruits as well. They can they can undergo years of aging, and they will balance the tannins out with other characteristics as they go. So the other interesting thing about the Nebbiolo grape is that compared with the annual growth cycle of other regional grape varieties, this is one of the first varieties to bud and the last variety to actually ripen, with harvest taking place mid to even late October. In some vintages, producers are able to pick and complete the fermentation of other grapes like Dolcetto, which we tried a couple of weeks ago, and that's fermentation is finished before the Nebbiolo is even harvested. So to aid ripening, they will often plant Nebbiolo grapes in areas that are south and southwest facing to maximize the impacts of the sun. So we're going to Barbaresco and a wonderful family-owned winery called Musso. There's the village of Barbaresco itself, and you can see the outlying areas with the vines and the fairly steep contours there. Let's have a look at a map. Okay, so the Nebbiolo grape has been present in Barbaresco for hundreds and hundreds of years. And another interesting thing about Barbaresco is you can see this is the region itself, the official region, and you can see it's subdivided into many, many different regions. They're almost reminiscent in some ways of the little Klimat, or the tiny plots of land that you get in Burgundy. So you can see on the right of the screen there, you've got Pora, which is where we're enjoying the grapes from tonight for this particular wine. It's, as you can see, quite steeply terraced there from the contour lines, and it's facing in a classic southwest direction to make the most of the sun. So it's quite a historical vineyard in the region. It's only about 2.5 hectares, mainly limestone with intersections of clay. So it's particularly suitable for the cultivation of the Nebbiolo grape. It stands a little bit elevated. It's got an altitude of between about 240 and 280 meters above sea level there. So let's have a look at the wine itself. So have a little sniff and a sip, and as you're doing, I'll describe a little bit about how it's made. So this is a wonderful family-owned business that was started as a winery in the late 1920s, and is still owned by the same family some 4 generations later. The grapes are hand harvested and are crushed and descend actually at the cellar. Then the vinification follows a traditional method in steel containers initially. The maceration, that's extracting the tannin and the color, takes place over about 3 weeks. So that's a fairly intense extraction of color and tannin, and it has regular pump overs to kind of keep the process circulating. It's fermented at a temperature of about 28 to 30 degrees, which is relatively high for wine, towards the top end of what you'd expect. And then after racking, the new wine is matured in oak barrels, initially of 50 hectoliters for a year, and then for another 10 to 12 months in slightly smaller barrels of 20 hectoliters. The idea behind that is as you go down in capacity, you increase the surface area volume ratio, and that increases the interaction, first of all, with the oak itself and into the wine, and also the permeability of the oak barrels to just a little bit of oxygen into the system to, again, help that maturation process and soften the tannins. So after that, the bottling takes place. It's bottled in the summer of the second year after harvest. The wine is then stored in the winery for a further 7 to 8 months. And then finally, it's ready for the market and ready to drink. So there's a picture of the family themselves. And we've had the pleasure of their virtual company a few months back when we went through a large number in their range. And it was great. And we've all been very impressed by the consistency and the quality of what they do. So let's have a little go at this now and tell us what you're thinking. This is quite a big one, but quite soft as well. You've got quite a lot of complex aromas there. There's the red fruits of cherries and raspberries. Somebody says wild strawberries along, I think. And then there's some slightly earthier hints of sort of dried flowers and herbs. And then we've got the wood effect, which is gently nicely spiced with a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla. Now, straight away, I think this calls out for something to eat with it. I mentioned there's a few ideas if you've got some charcuterie or something more substantial like roasts or stews, braised Italian cuisine, international sort of dishes. If you're vegetarian, stuff with lentils, they go extremely well. That little bit of earthiness there. And if you're a cheese fanatic, try some Italian cheeses like Parmigiano and Gorgonzola maybe. So this is, I think, a really nice wine. It's got the DOCG denomination, which is a high quality. The makers reckon it's ready to drink after 4 years. So this is 2014. So it's really starting to come into its own because it will last for anything up to 25 years. It'll continue to age. So it's a really elegant wine that doesn't peak too soon. So we're not the only ones who think it's good. Musso 2014 Pora got a score of 94 points from Wine Enthusiasts. You can read what they say about it there. So what do you think, guys? Tell us what you think.
I think it's good. I'm definitely getting the licorice. So I guess star anise is a sort of similar flavour. Earthiness. I think it's nice.
Yeah. I'll definitely get the kind of very kind of perfume to me. So get that kind of violet thing going on. Very fresh, but it's also got a lot of power. Good tannic structure. So, and what you say about food is, definitely. I think this wine needs food and be excellent with food, but high quality wine. Tim, good selection.
I think it's nice. Somebody's is it still a little panic? Somebody says. I think it's quite a calm wine. There is definitely tannin there, and I think the tannin. We've been into this before. Particularly, we went to cheese and wine a couple of weeks ago. Tannin combines very, very well with protein, so it actually has the effect of combining with protein and also the fat. So if you've got some cheese or maybe some a little bit of meat or charcuterie, you'll find it changes the apparent texture of the wine in the mouth, and the appearance of tannin will be much diminished once you've had a little nibble. The tannin effectively cleanses the palate from the slight stickiness of the fatty protein, and so it's a really good symbiotic relationship that tannin has with protein. So good, don't panic. We've been asked, did we buy it on release and keep it, or have we bought it more recently?
We've had it near enough on release. So we've been dealing with Musso for quite a few years now. So 14 near enough on release. We had The 16 as well, which is all sold through, slightly different style. But yeah, the 14's nearly sold through, but there are a few bottles for you guys to go at.
They're not making it
If
anymore.
you choose, if you want to.
Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that one. Now, one of the things we like to do is to have a little poll every so often, just to keep you engaged. So in this part of the world, every year, just before Lent, at the Ivrea Carnival, there is what they call the Battle of the Oranges. Thousands of townspeople organise groups and basically hurl oranges at each other. It's the largest food fight in Italy, and that's saying something. The legend actually dates back to medieval times when the area was ruled by an evil duke. He forced young newlywed women to spend the night with him. And one such person who was summoned to the duke's bedchamber, once she was in the duke's room, apparently cut off his head and then went to the balcony swinging it joyfully as if to say, look what I've done, we will not be oppressed. And that started a revolution. So in honor and to commemorate her, they have this wonderful carnival festival every Sunday to Tuesday before Lent. What I'd like to know is, what was the name of the woman who has been honored by this carnival? Is it Gabriella, Isabella, Francesca, Elisabetta, or Violetta? So don't think too much about it, just have a guess. Okay, we've reached nearly 76% response. I'm going to count this down now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you've gone as a group for Francesca. It was actually Violetta. So you've learned something now. You may forget lots and lots of things, but hopefully you'll remember all throughout your life that the name of the woman who cut off the evil duke's head was Violetta. She violated him. Good. Okay. Cal, I'm going to duck out of this now and hand over to you.
Cheers, Tim.
Just before we do that, there's a lovely passing shot of the Piedmont vineyards there. You can see quite delicious looking vineyard and the terroir there facing the sun. Right, over to you, Cal.
Cheers, Tim. So second wine of the evening is the 2013 Centenaire Premier Cru Les Gravières from the Côte de Beaune in Burgundy, and it's made by Domaine Roger Belland. Now, you'll see a map of Burgundy in front of you. Now, Burgundy is located towards the southeast of France. So you have Chablis here in the north, which is responsible for very fine Chardonnay, very, very mineral and fresh Chardonnays. You then have the Côte d'Or department further south, which is comprised of the famous Côte de Nuits and Côte de Beaune. You then have the Chalanet a little bit further south, then the Mâconnais, and then Beaujolais. Now, with regards to climates in Burgundy, Burgundy has what we call a cool continental climate with fairly warm summers, but also very cold winters. Now, this is what's known as a marginal climate, as the region is so northerly and so cool that the grapes just about ripen fully in each vintage to allow a fine balance between concentration of fruit, but also freshness. Now, in terms of the history of Burgundy, wine has been made here for thousands of years, but it was actually the monks and monasteries of the Roman Catholic Church during the early Middle Ages and onwards that shaped the Burgundy wine region as we know today. Now, the church was an extensive owner of Burgundy vineyards, and it was these guys that first recognized that different vineyard plots consistently produced different wines. And this is ultimately the reason for different sub-regions, villages, communes, and vineyards that we have today. Now, today, there are actually over 100 different communes in Burgundy, and within these communes, there are over 1,000 climats or plots. Now, it's these unique plots of land and the soils there that really make Burgundy so special. Now, I've got a nice quote for you here, actually, you'll see in a second on the screen. And this is from French journalist and the president of the Association of Climat de Bourgogne, Bernard Pivot. Now, he states that in Burgundy, when we talk about climate, we don't look up to the heaven, but down to the earth. So it's all about the soils, Tim.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, the other image you see in front of you is the Hospice de Beaune, which is a hospital foundation from the Middle Ages. And this is actually one of France's most prestigious and historic monuments. Now, I won't go into too much detail here, as we'll give you a bit more information about the Hospice de Beaune and the famous Hospice de Beaune auction during our virtual Burgundy wine tasting in a couple of weeks, Tim.
Good idea. I'm looking forward to that.
It's going to be a good one. If you've not got tickets, they're running out. They're running out. Now, in Burgundy, there are 4 tiers of vineyard classification. So you have Regional, Village, Premier Cru, and then Grand Cru, which is the pinnacle of quality in Burgundy. Now, the one we're tasting now is a Premier Cru status, but I'll touch on that a little bit more shortly. Now, as a region, Burgundy is regarded as the region to produce the finest Chardonnay and finest Pinot Noir in the world. In fact, wines from this region are so sought after that prices of the very best wines have gone through the roof. Now, I'll give you a bit of context here. Not long ago, I sold a bottle of Romanée-Conti 2015 for £18,000. That's one bottle, and that's before taxes. Now, despite the very, very high or extremely high prices at the top, Burgundy does produce wines that offer excellent value for money, which I'm definitely going to prove to you this evening.
Is that why whoever's pouring that 2015 DRC is being so mean with the?
I think so. It's probably that's probably £1,000 in a in the glass there, Tim, which is it's crazy. But
that's even less than I pour.
Now, in a moment, you'll see a map of the Côte de Beaune. Now, we've actually been working with Roger Bellon for over 10 years now, but the domain itself actually dates back as far as 1839. Now, the domain is located in the commune of Sontenay, which is in the southern part of the Côte de Beaune, which you'll see circled there, and that's where Sontenay is. And Roger and his daughter Julie, there they are, they run the domain and they represent the 5th and 6th generations of winemakers. Now, these guys, they passionately cultivate 23 hectares of vines from some of the best terroir in Burgundy, including Premier and Grand Cru appellations from Sontenay, Chassagne-Montrachet, and Puligny-Montrachet. Now, there you go. Use the map of the Sontenay commune. Now, the wine we're tasting now, it's made from 100% Pinot Noir, and it's from the Premier Cru vineyard of Les Gravières. It's actually the finest vineyard in the whole of the Sontenay commune, and you should see it's circled on the map shortly. Now, you won't be surprised to know that Gravière translates into English as gravel. So the soils here are comprised of a milestone topsoil, which has a high content of lime, which is gravelly. But there is also a subsoil of clay that's particularly high in iron content. Now, the limestone topsoil, what this does is impart a freshness, a salinity, and minerality in the wine, which I'm sure you'll be picking up, whereas the high iron content in the clay gives a richness and roundness to the wine. An excellent balance, I would say. Now, Roger and Julie's plot in Les Gravières is only 1.1 hectares, which is about 2.5 acres. This actually produces around 450 cases, give or take, vintage dependent, year on year. Now, this is tiny, especially if you consider the fact that this has got to be divided up globally. So very, very small amount. And then for a bit more context, the whole of Les Gravières vineyard is about 9 hectares, which is 1/10 of a square kilometer. So, pretty small area. Now, the vintage, with regards to the vintage of this wine, now it's 2013. Now, despite it being a very challenging vintage for wine growers, the overall quality is very high. Now, spring was largely cool and wet, and the summer actually resulted in devastating hailstorms. Fortunately, better weather in August and September allowed the grapes to ripen both phenolically, so the pips, the skins and stems, but it also created a sufficient accumulation of sugar. Now, in terms of the style, as famous wine critic Jansen Robinson stated, there she is, 2013 is far from opulent, it's fresh and focused. Now, I'd certainly agree in this wine that is the case. However, the good thing about this wine is that it does have a nice roundness to it, almost a richness to it as well, which kind of counteracts that freshness. So, I think it's very, very good. Now, regards to the winemaking of this wine, The grapes are hand harvested, they're destalked, they're crushed, then placed into stainless steel vats for a temperature controlled maceration and then alcoholic fermentation. Now, this is when the phenolic compounds, so the color and tannin, are extracted from the grape solids, and is when the juice begins to acquire its aroma and flavor characteristics. So it's a very important stage in the winemaking process of red Burgundy. Now, once this is complete, the wine is placed into oak barriques, where it undergoes a malolactic fermentation, so the conversion of malic acids into lactic acids. Once this is complete, the wine is transferred into brand new oak barriques, where the maturation process begins. In the case of this wine, it's for 12 months. After this, the wine is then ready for bottling. Now, time for a proper taste. So it's kind of ruby, pale ruby color. Very expressive nose, very floral. You know, there are similarities actually to the Barbaresco Porro. I get that kind of dried rose petals, bit of peony, violets again, bit of pomegranate, black cherry, spiced plum, bit of wild strawberry again, and then I get a kind of even a curried spice. So very, very complex. The palate offers a silky texture, very fresh acidity, which is synonymous with the 13 vintage, as Jancis says. Cool, but concentrated red and blue fruits, followed by a kind of earthy note, minerality. You get that, you know, savoury or even saline, mineral aspect on the back, and then a savoury black pepper coming through, quite persistent actually on the finish. I think very fine. You know, despite a challenging vintage, I think the result is superb, really. Excellent balance. You get that freshness, ripe, concentrated fruits, and you know it's an effortless balance. Now, for me, I think it's excellent value for a wine so complex, particularly as the price is just a little bit further north. I've gone for the roof. Price $26.99. We still have a few bottles left. What do you think, Tim? You like that one?
I do. I mean, it is complex. And I think it's quite elegant. The thing is that sometimes when you initially open it up, you can get with some red Burgundies, you get almost a whiff of either forest floor or even, dare we say it, farmyard, because there's a kind of real earthiness there which underpins the delicate fruit. I think you quite often find that with Burgundian Pinot.
Yeah, that's a positive attribute for sure. Yeah.
So. You know, everyone is their, you know, their own taste. I had somebody comment that you know, it didn't perhaps taste quite as fresh as others initially, and I think that's, you know, got some bottle age there and the complexity that develops. A lot of people really look for red Burgundy to have that kind of underpinning earthiness, which is definitely an acquired taste, but will also give the glass a little bit of a swirl and a chance for things to kind of settle down and open up. And I think you'll find the balance really works well. So, okay, very good. I've got another little question for people. What I'd like to know is, Callum mentioned there were over 100 different appellations in Burgundy, but how many? 105, 7, 9, 11, 13, or 15? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Spread of answers there. The correct answer is currently 113. Yes, 113 different appellations. So there's more appellations in Burgundy than any of the other regions. There you go. Right. Let's move on now. No kind of old world wine tasting would be really complete without a reference to the kind of epicenter of where wine was first commercially exploited. So we're going over to Lebanon. The vineyards were developed initially there by seafaring ancestors of the modern Lebanese, and they spread the know-how for their viticulture to Greece, Egypt, and Italy, and along the Mediterranean. They were known as Phoenicians after the purple dye that they made from seashells, but also famed for being able to revive their cities rapidly after destruction. So the Phoenicians actually inspired the legend of the phoenix rising from the ashes. The region's wines are actually mentioned in the Bible, and in an area in the region where Christ allegedly turned water into wine. That's near the southern port of Tyre in Baalbek, which originally was devoted to the Phoenician fertility god Baal, and it's a site of a vast Roman temple to honor the god of Bacchus, and there it is. I thought it'd be nice to have a look at some of the elements of Lebanon, which, if like me, prior to learning a little bit about Lebanese wines, didn't perhaps realize that there was such a diversity of sort of soil and landscape there. So this has been an impressive temple, one of the most decorated in the Roman world, and one of the best preserved. Got 8 columns along the facade there, and I think 15 along the sides. And there's lots of rich carvings to various scenes, from Mars and his winged victory, to Diana drawing an arrow, Vulcan with his hammer, and Bacchus with the grapes. So the temple was begun in the reign of Nero in the 1st to mid-century AD, and its attribution to the god of wine is based on the reliefs showing the vines and other Bacchic themes. So let's have a look at the country. The first vineyards were in the Bekaa Valley there. This represents the valley, and you can see there's quite a lot of vineyards there now. They were planted in the 1850s with vines that were brought in by the French. So that's the sort of development of the relatively modern era of wine as we kind of know it. The climate here is typically Mediterranean. It's got dry summers, cool nights, and a consistent level of rainfall. You've got Mediterranean style grapes in the main. So you see a lot of Cinsault, Syrah, Carignan, Grenache grown, and also Bordeaux styles are quite well represented there. So you've got Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec. There's a few native grapes being grown as well. The biggest area of production is in the Bekaa Valley, and it sits at an altitude of about 1,000 to 1,200 meters. So that's comparable with the Mendoza region of Argentina. So the soil there is largely limestone under a loam or clay. Can be quite rocky or gravelly. Pretty well all the vineyard work is done by hand, and wineries range from the very, very traditional to indeed the very modern, and many combine what they believe are the best of both worlds. So in comparatively modern times, Lebanese wine has seen quite a resurgence. This represents the growth of wineries going from only 7 just over 30 years ago to about 50 now. So you can see the kind of expansion there. So on to Chateau Musar itself. So let's go forward to the Middle Ages, France making its first appearance in the Musar story with the arrival of the Hochar family. So they arrived in Lebanon with the Crusades, basically. So their relationship with France is kind of intertwined over many centuries and is at the core of their own story. The French connection was next sort of established in the 1850s when the Jesuit missionaries introduced the first of the French varieties into the region from French-governed Algeria. And the modern day story of Moussard began in 1930, when on return from a visit to France, the young Gaston Hauchard founded Chateau Moussard in the cellars of the 18th century castle in Gazir. So Lebanon was under French administration at this time, and there was an unprecedented demand for wine. After starting as something of a hobby, it became a serious business following the development of what became a lifelong friendship with another big wine family name, Major Ronald Barton of Langoa Barton in Bordeaux, who was at the time stationed in Lebanon during World War II. So rolling on to the late 1950s, Gaston's son Serge became the winemaker at Moussard, and he completed his winemaking studies at Bordeaux University. So the intertwining between France and Lebanon has continued right the way through. He was then joined by his brother, who assumed control of the finance and marketing department. So after many years of experimentation, Serge finally created the formula for his exciting and slightly idiosyncratic wines. And the 79 Moussard was propelled onto the international stage, where it was hailed as the find of the fair by none other than Michael Broadbent at the Bristol Wine Fair. At the same time, Moussard set up their UK office, so there's been a strong presence in the UK ever since. And considering that only 2 years before, civil war had broken out in Lebanon, which was to carry on for another 10 or 15 years, despite all these dangers and difficulties, they managed to continue to function without loss of a single vintage as a result of the troubles. All of this, despite the pickers having to take shelter from shelling in one vintage or another, when they had to be sometimes boated in under the cover of darkness to harvest the grapes. So that's amazing dedication to the cause, and unsurprisingly, Decanter magazine nominated Serge Hauchard as their first Man of the Year in 1984. So the map you see on the left here, this is the Bec or Bekaa Valley, and the winery is located some distance away, just north of Beirut. The reason for the distance between the vineyard and the winery is that with all the kind of volatility and instability that has beset Lebanon in recent years, it was uncertain as to where the border was going to be with Syria. So they didn't want to risk having the winery too close to the border. Hence, the winery was moved out of sort of harm's way towards the coast there. Okay, so let's have a little further investigation of the man himself. He's an interesting chap, or rather, sadly, was an interesting chap. He passed away just a few short years ago. He'd originally studied to become a civil engineer. He found, though, he had an interest in wine, both from a professional point of view, and as a raison d'etre, he actually described wine as an answer to the mystery of existence. 1959 was his first formal vintage involvement, and he was bottling the 1956 vintage, which had been made by his father. So again, the multi-generational continuity continues, like with so many fine winemakers. So at the original production of the estate, the wine was consumed entirely within Lebanon. When civil war broke out in the 70s, however, there was a danger that all the entire market was going to disappear. So it was at that point that Serge decided that he needed to find new markets for the wines, and thus began this extensive pattern of travel, determined to find new markets and introduce the wine to new drinkers around the world. Michael Broadbent recollects that there was scarcely a wine event in the world he didn't attend. The whole wine world knew him, and he traveled a huge amount. So there we go. So let's move on to the actual wine that we're looking at this evening. And this is the Hauchard Père et Fils Red 2016. There are 3 tiers within the Hauchard or Musar nomenclature. There is the jeune, meaning the young wines, then there's Père et Fils, and then there's the Chateau. The Père et Fils is sometimes seen as a second wine, but there's more to it than that, really. The grapes for this are sourced from specially selected vineyards near the village of Aana in the Bekaa Valley. And they've got really gravelly soil over a limestone base, very low yields, which tends to concentrate the flavour, as we know. They only produce about 25 or 30 hectolitres per hectare. The altitude also keeps the average temperatures at around 25 degrees, and you get some snowy winters, mild springs, and hot summers. So you've got quite a large diurnal range as well in the growing seasons. That's the difference between the heat of the day and the coolness of the night. So that elevated plateau where the vines grow will tend to produce that extra freshness and with a crisp acidity there to keep the fruit nice and fresh. So the blend of this 2016, which was a good year, is 50% Cinsault, 35% Grenache, and the balance of 15% Cabernet Sauvignon. Fermentation temperature was between 27 and 29 degrees. The resulting wine was matured for 6 months in French oak barrels, new oak, and then it was blended in the following winter and bottled in the following summer. So the components of the wine for that particular year are described as follows. The Cinsault was elegant and silky with an explosion of red fruit aromas. Grenache also enjoyed 2016 growing conditions and produced quite a high sugar content, leading to quite a contribution on the alcohol stakes. And the Cabernet was the real star with a great combination of fruit, concentration, and depth. So all in all, a very good year for Chateau Musar and for this wine, Auchard Père et Fils. So it will keep well. It's drinking well now. It's got a nice balance of quite soft tannins, good acidity, lots of red fruits there, and plums, cherries. Again, do pair it with some food. Try it a little bit without. Try something with, and hopefully you enjoy that one. What do you think of the Musar, Cal?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, quite like the nose. It kind of reminds me of tomato gazpacho or something like that with a bit of balsamic, that kind of thing going on. But yeah, but structures there, fruits there. It's fresh. It's got those kind of beginning to get the kind of secondary aromas and flavors coming through as well. So very nice.
Good. Well, that's parting view of the valley there. As you can see, it looks absolutely superb. Ideal growing conditions, and I think people who've maybe not tried Chateau Musar before, we're not aware of the history there. It's a very exciting and interesting wine, and an interesting family winemaker. And I think cracking value at a whisker under £20. Okay. Actually, I've got a little question to ask you. Let's have a look. So I'm going to ask you a question about Chateau Musar. Now, there was one year where the wine was not released by the winery because the wine started to ferment en route to the winery from the vineyard. So was it 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, or 88? Those of you who don't know me already will quickly realize that I have a slightly warped and mean sense of humor and enjoy these little nuggets of trivia. So counting this down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I can tell you it was actually 1984. In 1984, because of the local difficulties, shall we say, they actually had to transport the grapes by sea round to the winery, and it took such a long time in such warmth that the grapes started to ferment en route. So unfortunately, although they harvested them, they couldn't release the wine from that year. So that was 1984. So if you come across any Chateau Mouzon 1984, I don't think it's quite correct. Okay, with that little diversion there, back to you, Cal.
Cheers,
And
Tim.
let's go to Spain.
Okay. So the fourth wine of this evening is the 2018 Loredana from Marco Abella in Priorat, which is located in the Catalonia region in Spain. Now you'll see in front of you it's a map of Spain with all the primary wine regions color-coded. So you've got Rioja in the kind of central northern area. You have La Mancha centrally in yellow. Then you have Priorat in the northeast, just there. In a second, you'll see a kind of a zoomed in map of the Catalonia region. There you go. So it's a detailed map here of Catalonia, and you've got Priorat located in a kind of grey-green area circled just there. Now, the climate of Priorat is a continental climate. However, the climate of Priorat is more extreme than most. Now, you have cold winds from the north, and these can be problematic. But in the main, these are buffered by the Mont Massif mountains, which you'll see an image of in a second, but also the warm Mistral wind that blows across from the east, actually comes through the Rhone across into Priorat. Now, summers are long, hot, and dry, while winters can be very, very cold, up to -4 degrees Celsius. There is also an occasional risk of frost, hailstones, and also drought. Now, unlike most prize vineyards in the Northern Hemisphere, which face south and capture maximum sun and heat, many in Priorat actually face northeast. Now, adequate sun and heat is never a problem in Priorat. In fact, the northeast exposure means the shade of the afternoon protects the grapes from the intense heat and sun and stops them from burning, shriveling, or over ripening. Also, the elevation of the vineyards and their exposure to the Mediterranean Sea helps to mitigate the extreme heat. Now, in terms of the soils of Priorat, the soils are of paramount importance to the Priorat winemakers. Now, in a moment, you'll see an image of the Licorella soils, and these soils, or Priorat, sorry, is actually of volcanic origin. And its flagship source is Licorella, and what Licorella translates from Catalan is slate. Now, this Licorella, it's free draining, it's a nutrient poor soil, and it's made up of partially decomposed slate and quartz. Now, the color of the slate is reddy black, as you can see, and it actually contains particles of mica, which reflects sunlight and conserves heat. What this does is aid the ripening of the Garnacha, the Carignan, the Cabernet Sauvignon that grow here. Now, it's actually said that Licorella, the soils, impart flavour and aromas of freshly wetted summer pavements with a little bit of wet clay thrown in. So if you're currently imagining that you're riding a bike during the summer rain, this is why, Tim.
I obviously will need to do some more research as I cycle back and forth from Nichols and Perks in this inclement weather that we have. And
yeah, you're probably used to that that aroma.
Yeah. From riding the bike rather than consuming quantities of Priorat.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So in a moment, you'll see a kind of classification pyramid of Priorat. Now, in Priorat and in Spain, actually, you have a tiered classification system. So you have VT at the bottom, VC, DO, DOCA, and then Vinho de Pago. Now, the classification of Priorat is DOCA, and there's only one other region in Spain that has this qualification level, which is Rioja. Now, this gives you an indication of just how highly regarded Priorat is within Spain. Now, just for a bit of context, Viña de Pargo is actually a relatively new category of classification that was introduced in 2003, and this covers individual wine-producing estates whose wines fell outside the existing classification system, but nonetheless consistently high quality. But that could be another tasting, Tim, maybe.
We can go into that in more detail then.
Yeah. Now, in terms of aging, classic Priorat is generally made from old vine Garnacha or Grenache, blending with Carignan. Now, most Priorat is aged in oak for at least 12 months, but the official Priorat appellation production laws recognise 3 levels of wine quality based on the maturation process. Now, you have Crianza. Now, Crianza wines spend 1 year in oak, followed by a year in bottle before release. You then have Reserva, and that spends 1 year in oak and then 2 years in bottle before release. And then finally, you have Grand Reserva, which spends 2 years in oak and 3 years in bottle before release. Now, the wine we're tasting now is classified as a Crianza. So there's a map of the Priorat region. Now, Priorat is also broken down into 12 different sub-regions, all of which impart their own characteristics into the wines. Now, the grapes that go into this wine we're tasting now come from the Pereira sub-region, which is number 8 on the map. There you go, circled. And it has this Surana River flowing through it, which acts as a heat moderator, which is very important. Now, the Pereira sub-region is characterized by its unique terroir of Licorella, which I've talked about, but also its wines are renowned for their mineral and fresher attributes. So if you're getting that kind of minerality and freshness, it's due to the Pereira location. Now, Spain's hot and dry vineyards, they're known for their low yields, but Priorat's vines are low yielding even by Spanish standards. Yields here are extremely low and average less than 5 hectolitres per hectare. Now, to provide you a bit of context, the Spanish average is 25 hectolitres per hectare, while vineyards in cool, wet Germany, for example, are close to 80 hectolitres per hectare. So, the difference is staggering. Interestingly, yield is actually closely linked to quality. Essentially, lower yields mean higher quality. And there are actually 3 key reasons for Priorat's super low yields. One is climate, one is the nutrient-poor soils, so the Licorella, and one is vine age. And some of the vine age are actually as old as 100 years old. Now, with regards to the history of Priorat, winemaking here dates back as far as the 1100s, when, you guessed it, Tim, the Carthusian monks who had learned vineyard techniques in Provence, France, tended the land here, and they did so for around 700 years until about 1835, when the lands were claimed by the state and redistributed. Now, unfortunately, in the late 1800s, the small insect pest Phylloxera hit the region, devastated the vines, and caused the region to collapse and depopulate, Tim.
I think we have a little warning now. So if anyone suffers from entomophobia, look away now, because that's a morbid fear of insects. So we just want to tell you briefly a little bit about Phylloxera. They are little insects that nibbled away at the roots of the vines. It was reckoned that in France alone there were over 6 million acres of vineyards wiped out. This infestation came across from America with the intrepid explorers bringing back all sorts of biological and plant specimens, and the natural vines in America are resistant. The roots are resistant to Phylloxera. In Europe, they've never been exposed, so of course the little insects ran rife and virtually wiped out all the vines in the mid to late 1800s in Europe. The solution was to get American vines for the rootstocks and then grafting European vines on top. So the Phylloxera, however, had a really good time for a few decades from the middle of the 19th century up to when they worked out how to fix the problem.
Excellent. Cheers for that, Tim. Now,
Good.
despite the drunken phylloxera, the region bounced back, and the government made Priorat an official DO or appellation in 1954. But it actually wasn't until 1989 that things really started to change for Priorat. Now, you'll see an image there. That's René Barbier, and René Barbier actually owns the famous Priorat estate of Clos Mogador. Now, what René did was form a gang of passionate viticulturists and winemakers and advocates to create several site-specific wines in Priorat. Now, what these guys did, they introduced fine wine making techniques, for example, aging in new oak barrels, small barrels, and then with investments and interest inspired by René Barbier and Co., there are now 4,700 acres, so 1,900 hectares of vineyards in Priorat, and nearly 100 wineries, with over 600 growers. So, you know, what René did was massive for the Priorat region. Now, the vintage of this wine we're tasting now is 2018. And 2018 was a very good vintage in Priorat. The harvest was actually kind compared to previous vintages and years, thanks to generous rainfall and a favourable growing season, which actually occurred without any major complications, which, you know, is fairly rare. All in all, fruit quality was very good, and the wines are very balanced in terms of structure, flavour, and acidity, which I'm sure you're all picking up in this wine. Now, the producer of this wine is Marco Obeya, and Nichols and Perks have been working with Marco Obeya for around 5 years now. But the Marco family have been involved in the wine industry since the 15th century. Now, interestingly, the Marco family appear in the first census of Catalonia in 1497. So, you know, the family has a lot of experience when it comes to wine. Today, the property is run by David and Olivia Marco, and they really are making some excellent wines. Now, the cuvee we're tasting now, the Loredana, it's said to bring to life the virtues of the land of Priorat, with the wine expressing the authenticity, typicity, and essence of the region. You know, and I certainly wouldn't disagree. Now, in terms of the winemaking of this wine, grapes are hand harvested from bush vines, which you'll see in front of you, which are kind of closer to the ground than standard vines. In fact, they have to be hand harvested due to the extreme aspect of most of the vineyards in Priorat. Now, they're brought to the winery, they're crushed, and then an alcoholic fermentation and maceration occurs to extract the colours and tannins, which we've talked about. Once this is complete, the malolactic fermentation occurs, and once this is complete, maturation in oak barriques occurs for 12 months. So it's a Criantha, again, as I mentioned earlier. After this, the wine is then blended and readied for bottling. Now, you'll be interested to know that the final blend of this wine is 55% Garnacha, 35% Carignan, and there's 10% Cabernet Sauvignon in there. Now, time to give it a proper taste. So it's almost purple actually in colour. So it's kind of like bright ruby, edging on purple maybe. I get a lot of kind of blue fruit on the nose. So I don't know, kind of blueberries, a little floral scent too, followed by a bit of spice. There's a bit of citrus in there as well. But then like a smoky mineral aroma that derives from that licorella that we talked about. Yeah, nice kind of ripe fruit and a creamy aroma as well, which will come from the oak, of course. The palate, really concentrated red fruits, bit of red plum, strawberry even, and a bit of black cherry in there as well, actually. So it's nicely concentrated, but quite light on its feet. It's not heavy. You know, I think there's a lot of black and blue fruits as well. But yeah, that bitter cherry almost. Mm-hmm. I think the tannins are very, very fine. They're there, but they're covered well. Very supple actually, and you know, you get that nice sweetness on the finish, which is tied a bit in that floral aspect. Those floral aspects I was talking about again with the smoky notes, you know, on the back. You're interested to know that fine wine publication Wine Spectator gave this wine 92 points out of 100, so very, very, very big score. I can see why. For me, an excellent wine and a bargain really, under £20, £19.99. Interestingly, the alcohol is 14.5% in this wine, so it's quite high, relatively high. But this is down to the extreme heat of Priorat, but also down to the Garnacha or Grenache grape, which often produces wines of a higher alcohol. I think it's delicious, Tim. What do you think?
I do. I'm very impressed. I mean, you can detect that fairly high alcohol content, I think, because you've got just a little warmth at the back of the throat. I won't say it's burning. It's just a little bit of extra warmth or heat. But some wines with a relatively high degree of alcohol, they're just kind of they're not subtle.
No,
Whereas
I mean,
this I think is quite a muscular wine, but it's like you said, it's very light on its feet. It's good description. There's a lot of complexity there, and I think it's really nicely balanced. Also, for one that's still, it's Crianza, as you said, so it's still, it's a relatively young wine.
it could certainly age. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's only had, a comparatively short amount of time in wood and bottle maturation. So I think this is honestly a real winner here. One or two of you have been saying that you've been liking it, which is good, and that you haven't previously had Priorat. And I think it's becoming quite a well revered region, and people are really discovering it because they do things a little bit differently there compared with perhaps the Rioja region, which is of course the one that everyone knows of in Spain.
Yeah, and I think there's not that much made really. I mean, 5 hectolitres per hectare. That's staggering. I mean, I can't think of anywhere else really in the world that with the yields that low. You talk about even Grand Cru Burgundy is far higher. So yeah, that's very interesting. But again, as I mentioned, that adds to the concentration and the quality really of the wines.
Yeah, I think it's a real nice. I think it's a great balance. Keep going back to that. Do let us know what you're pairing with these wines, folks. Assuming you are, because eating something, even if it's just a little nibble, will really quite change the balance of how the wine is perceived in your palate. So, so there we go. Good. Right. Take a short pause, and we're going to the south of France now. So we're going to the Rhone Valley. You can see the Rhone Valley itself and the southern Rhone in particular, is pretty close to the coast there. Here's a more detailed view of it, and we are looking at Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is arguably the epicenter of the region around here. It's just to the north of Avignon, where the Pope once lived. So there's a clues to how did it get its name. And the region itself is known for its bold, also Grenache-based blends. Officially, of course, the region can make white wines, but the majority of the wine coming out of the region is red. They can use up to 13 different grape varieties. And the name, of course, means Pope's New Castle, and refers to the time when the seat of the Catholic Church was in nearby Avignon in the 14th century. So Châteauneuf-du-Pape was actually the very first French wine appellation created in 1936. The owners of the appellation at the time were chaired by Baron Pierre Le Roy Boisseau-Marier, and he actually created the original bottle, the famous bottle with the cross keys logo, which we'll have a look at in a little bit more detail shortly. So there are about 320 wine growers in the region, and that produces from just over 3,000 hectares about 14 million bottles a year. About 3/4 of the vineyards are dedicated to Grenache, and interestingly, about 1/3 of the wineries are now organically certified. One of the reasons for that is that you've got this Mistral wind and a lot of dryness, so it's quite arid. And the Mistral wind, which can refer to when it kind of seeps over the left or west towards Catalonia, but it barrels down the Rhone Valley and sometimes blows at 100 kilometers an hour, and it literally blows the cobwebs away. So you get far less mold, fungus, and little airborne pests as well, literally get blown away. So it's ripe for moving on to organic certification, where you're reducing or eliminating the amounts of pesticides and herbicides that you use. So in addition to the climate there, which is of course a Mediterranean climate, lots and lots of sun, pretty warm days and coolish nights, you've got these amazing big pebbles known as galets rouges, and they are precipitated from the movement of the glaciers millions and millions of years ago. And you can imagine how labor intensive it is to how difficult it is to work this soil. If you just sort of walk around those pebbles, it's quite a challenge. So moving on then, the Grenache Noir, which is the main grape variety, really works well in these sort of dry soils. You've got hot summers and then quite long periods of drought. These pebbles, which we looked at just now, they act almost like storage radiators. So you've got a little bit of altitude elevation, not massive, but enough to make a difference, particularly at night with the temperature dropping down a bit. So during the very, very sunny day, you get 2,700, 2,800 hours of sun a year, which is not quite double what you need to mature wine making grapes. So it's a significant amount of sun that you get. So they kind of charge up these stones, and then as the temperature drops, the stones are still retaining a certain amount of heat due to their high heat capacity, and they will help to keep the vines and the grapes warm in the cool nights. So many of the wines are matured traditionally in cellars and barrels, and this one is no exception. The first mention of the village goes back to the Middle Ages. The official French name became Châteauneuf-Calcernier, and the word Calcernier actually comes from the presence of the lime kilns in the village. And that was an economic powerhouse for the region, because they used their skills and natural resources to produce a lot of tiles for the roofs and tiles for the floors of the castle, and of course the nearby papal residence at Avignon. So let's have a look now at these two images. So on the right, you've got the kind of coat of arms of or emblem of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and on the left here you've got that design from the 1930s, and that was sort of way ahead of its time really, because it established a brand image. It was one of the first regions to actually send wine out in these distinctive bottles, as opposed to sending them out in barrels. The population, interestingly, population ebbs and flows a bit. Back in the first census in the 14th century, there were about a couple of thousand people, which made for quite a large village at the time. And then it ebbed and flowed a bit. There was a pandemic, dare I say it. There was the bubonic plague, which hit in the 1600s, by which time the population had dropped to just over 500. And then it built up again. So all these years later, the population is now just over 2,000, which is what it was all those hundreds of years ago. So let's have a look at this emblem in a bit more detail. This has actually become a recognized trademark or intellectual property. And there was a judgment in September 2004, and the French Supreme Court confirmed the validity of the rights attached to this special embossed bottle. And because of global competition and counterfeiting, it has actually solidified or consolidated a major asset for the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region to have this collective brand with such a strong identity, and also a legal protection on it as well. So enough of that, let's have a look at the wine itself. So this is 2015 Châteauneuf-du-Pape from Domaine Lafon Roque Épine. The estate has been in the same family since 1780, so it's actually older than Nichols and Perks. They are rightly proud of their traditionally produced wines there. The grapes are picked by hand from old vines, some of which are up to 60 years old, and they've been organically certified for nearly 10 years now. The blend of this particular wine is 80% Grenache, 10% Syrah, and 10% Mourvedre, which is, again, a fairly thick-skinned grape, which copes with all that extra sun and is very often found in the south of France there. So we've got this distinctive stony soil, and the climate, as we mentioned, is Mediterranean. So the hand harvesting protects both the grapes as they arrive at the winery in good condition, and also it protects the vines. So when you've got old vines, you want to make sure you look after them, and hand harvesting is more expensive, more labor intensive, more time consuming, but it's the investment into the future there. So the process itself, after de-stemming the grapes, there's a fairly lengthy fermentation process, like with some of the red wines that we've seen today, 21 days or so to obtain the right balance of tannins and supple tannins that we're looking for. At the end of the fermenting and resting in stainless steel tanks, the first racking process takes place. The wine is then aged in new barrels, some of which, interestingly, are kept at a slightly elevated temperature and some at a slightly reduced temperature between January and October. And then that allows the tannins, particularly for the Syrah and Mourvedre, to soften a little bit, get a little bit of extra oxygenation through the barrels, and that will bring a little bit of that kind of vanilla touch to blend with the structure of the Grenache. The bottling is around January, and then the blending will continue and the wine will age in barrels to get a good balance, which is going to improve for a few years. So it's a powerful, well-structured wine, this. We've got a nice, let's have a dig into it. You've got a nice rich colour there with that slightly purpley tinge. And you've got sort of quite dark fruits there, a bit of Morello cherry, a bit of cedar, and there's a whiff of perhaps bell pepper on the nose, which I certainly think you get a slight pepperiness as well on the palate. This is very typical of a good quality Chateauneuf du Pape. This is 2015 was known as a bombastic fruity vintage.
Yeah, very,
so
very good vintage.
It's a cracking vintage, so it means that some vintages will be a little bit more austere and have slightly bitter tannins, and need a long time to really get those softened out. Whereas this is 6 years old, which is it's coming into its good drinking window now. They're talking about 5 to 10 years. That's where we are now with this. It will continue to age and develop, but this is really bang on. Decant the wines for a little bit before serving if you're buying a full bottle, which I hope you will. This is great with even slightly spicier dishes like Moroccan tagines with olives, lamb, dolma, which is Turkish lamb stuffed peppers, slightly smoky barbecue or roast vegetables. There's a lot of good sort of strong flavors that this will stand up to, and I think is great. Chateauneuf du Pape is never inexpensive, but this at £30 I think is bang on. And in fact, Robert Parker gave this a massive 94-point score. So I think that says it all, really. So Jonathan Young has asked, how was the 2015 vintage in the Rhone and how much longer would you hold on this till you drink it? Well, I think we kind of sort of alluded to that a bit. It was a big, powerful fruit bomb of a year. It's drinking well now, but you can certainly hang on to this and it will age and develop even more complexity another 5, 10, even 15 years. So that's, as David Garnsworth has suggested, this is miles to go, surely. Yeah, I think you're right, David. Sign of a good wine is it's just coming into its drinking window now, but it's got a kind of fairly gentle glide path both up and down. So the thing to do is to buy a case now and just keep dipping into it every so often and see how it improves.
Yep.
What do you think of this one, Cal?
Yeah, I think it's excellent, Tim. Very complex. I mean, the nose, you get that kind of Grieg that's kind of synonymous with Southern Rhone or Southern France. A lot going on. Black cherry. The palate kind of super concentrated, but not kind of not flabby. It's still kind of there's a freshness there, but I get kind of like heaps of a lot of chocolate, Black Forest Gatto, that kind of thing going on. The structures there, yeah, I think I agree with both you and David. I think it's got plenty of time in terms of aging potential, but ultimately it's in a great place now. To be fair, I think it's excellent. Yeah.
Good. Well, ladies and gents, that nearly finishes our little show this evening. I've got one more question to ask you, which is actually just let us know what your favourite wines were. You can tick as many as you want. Not asking you to tick them all, but just so we get a bit of a feel for the relative popularity of the wines this evening. Vote, vote, vote. As people would say at a general election, vote early, vote often. So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds whilst you make your mind up. Counting this down now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. And what's always nice for Callum and I to see is when all the wines get at least some support there. So 2 clear winners this evening, I think, were the last 2, the Priorat and the Chateauneuf du Pape, but it was nice to see people getting into the others as well. So thank you for that participation. There's one more little thing to show you, and that is, of course, what's coming up. If you've enjoyed tonight, then enjoy us again. We've got Burgundy tasting coming up in a couple of weeks. There's a wonderful lineup for that. In fact, I would say this, wouldn't I? But you'll have to attend these to prove me wrong. We've got lovely Chateau Le Sègue, Saint-Emilion, Right Bank Bordeaux virtual wine tasting with Dimitri Ménard, who's a master sommelier. And we've got our own Spanish delights, Loire Valley tastings in April. And one really worth pointing out, Chateau Chasse Spleen virtual wine tasting. This is a wonderful Bordelais chateau. We did some work with him. This is Jean-Pierre Foubet, who is the owner manager of the chateau. Lots and lots of interesting tales, really interesting guy, and fabulous wines. I think that's an absolute bargain. And then in June, we've got Bruno Collin, which is a wonderful Burgundian domain that we work with for many years now. So again, I think a really nice lineup. We'll be adding some more, of course. And if you're interested in having your own personal wine tasting with a group of people, you need probably about 20 people or so to make it viable, but either privately or for corporations, then do get in touch. And we'd love to hear from you. So thank you for your comments. I'm going to stop the screen share now. And then if you want to hang around a little bit for a chat, you'll be very welcome to, but don't feel obliged to do so. So there we go. There you all are.
We just got you, Tim. That's better.
Callum, I've got a question for you, if I may.
Yeah.
The Musara we had tonight was interesting, but not a patch on. The main Chateau Musara that you sell, which I bought from you in the past, and I just wanted your opinion. How does that compare to the mainline bottle? Shall we say?
It's from kind of so the Hochar, the grapes that go into the Hochar are from kind of lesser vineyard sites essentially compared to the Musar. So as Tim mentioned, it's not necessarily a second wine or a declassified Musar. They're just separate plots that they don't see, fit enough to go into the Grand Van. However, it is of sufficient quality to make a separate kind of cuvee, and that's the answer really. Yeah. So the plots from Chateau Musar, just better ripening, maybe better terroir, better messier climates within wherever the plots are.
And I think in fairness, Cal's right, but also in fairness, I think the Père et Fils derivatives mature a little bit quicker. So the Chateau, the sort of full-blown Chateau Musar will probably need longer to come into their own, I think. Wouldn't you say, Cal?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And also the vines will be younger vines. So they haven't had a chance to kind of develop that kind of anti-vigor and things like that. So the older vines for Musar, for example, would yield less grapes and be slightly more concentrated. But that's part of it, Younger vines. That's not to say that certain plots that go into the Hochar at the moment in the future won't go into the Musar.
Yeah, I got you. It was nice, but for me, I'm a big Musar fan. I love it.
Interestingly, we may have a Musar tasting coming up.
All right.
Yeah. So you have to watch out for that. But there'll be certainly Grand Van expressions in that one. So watch this space. I guess.
I'm going to do avidly. Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Maybe I put
Cheers,
it somewhere.
Yeah, I think Matt, finally on the Musar thing. For people who've not tried the wine before, it's a good introduction to it because it's not too crazy price wise, and it shows you the kind of style that they go for. But I accept your point, particularly if you've tried a range of Chateau Musar before. It arguably hasn't quite got that ultimate depth, but of course it hasn't got the price point either.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, for my view, I've had Musar for years on and off. Sorry, here we go. I've had Musar for years on and off, and I must admit, Hochar. I think after the old man died, I think, and the son's taken over effectively, I think, isn't he? This one is certainly coming up, in my view, compared to what it was some few years ago when it was the second line. But, very, very good. Very good. I was impressed.
What was your favourite this evening, Neil?
I was impressed with it. What was mine? Well, I liked all of them, actually, but I'd go for the Priorat. I thought was good. Chateauneuf. And the Hochar.
Yeah.
Alison liked the Barbaresco, so there you go,
I certainly think the Priorat got better as the kind of tasting went on. I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, Callum. Yeah. But I'll certainly be going for the Priorat, so I'll be in touch tomorrow. Well, it won't be. Yeah, it will be tomorrow. You're probably not in tomorrow, are you?
No, not at the moment.
No, that'd be Monday.
Lockdown.
Going nowhere.
Yeah, goody. That's brilliant. But no, I really enjoyed it.
Good.
Thanks very much to both of you.
Cheers, Neil.
As usual, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Any more questions, guys? I can see Graham and Tom Silk there. They look like they want to ask some questions.
No, I'm not going to ask any questions, but it was very interesting to take part tonight. I mean, I thought the standout to me was Musar. I was interested in, and I thought it was fascinating to see what is maybe their second wine. Everyone tries Musar because it's renowned. I didn't know there was a depth of other wines around, so that's given me something to it. I thought the Santenay was interesting because it got the lowest vote from everybody, including myself. But I love the Spanish one. The Priorat was lovely. But for me, the star of the show was the Hochar. So
Interesting, yeah.
it was good. And the funny thing is, I always say to you when we speak that there's no such thing as a bad glass of wine. You finish it, if you don't like it, you don't have it again. And tonight we've learned. I've certainly learned. So that's been brilliant.
So what did you think of the Barbaresco, the Porro, Graham? Because you're not too far from there, or won't be soon, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's I thought it was
Okay.
I thought it was very good. I enjoyed the history of it, and I think Italy because I'm
Finished.
to find him.
What you
So I shall be. I'll we'll get some more examples of especially Lombardy or other northeastern, northwestern rather Italian wines. So it was again good knowledge, so I've learned a lot.
Good. I quite like the Italian one. I thought it was, to be fair, one of my favourite ones. I wasn't as keen on the Chateauneuf for my palate, but I thought, the Italian one was, for me, was the standout.
Yes, you probably like fresher style maybe, but yeah, I think it's a good wine, and the Chateauneuf for different reasons, but yeah.
No, but it was great, and it's obviously the second one that I've done, but it's always great to try different wines and regions and go outside your comfort zone. I mean, if you're dad, typically it's always through French, sort of Bordeaux and Saint-Emilion. So it's a great way to try not just Burgundy, but also Italian and Moussard and the like.
Yeah, definitely.
I think
I've got a question, if you can hear me, if I can bust in.
Please do.
It's really completely unrelated to the specific wines, but I was very impressed by the freshness of all the wines, considering they've been rebottled, I assume, into the smaller bottles. Do you put any gas on top of them before you put the lid on?
We didn't for this particular tasting. What we do, the general modus operandi is we uncork the bottles, obviously. We nose the bottles before we decant them into the smaller sample block.
Yeah, we taste them. Yeah, make sure
Yep.
they're.
So very occasionally you find one that isn't quite right, so you don't put that out. We try and get this fine balance between not letting them be hanging around too long before shipping them out. So that's why you tend to receive your wines just a couple of days before the event starts. We have used gas for some samples where the price, the bottle price of the wine justifies it.
Yeah, so for fine wine events, for
They
example,
might be more fragile, in other words.
well, yeah, if they're mature, so if you've got a fine wine event, for example, we've got the Chassepolline tasting, or
We gas for that one.
Chateau La Sègue, those events, we
And
would
also
use
when
argon.
we-
Yeah.
Sorry, Cal, we also gassed when we sent out some vintage port as well, because as you probably know, Graham, once you've opened a vintage port, you've really got quite a short window of opportunity before the freshness disappears. And it's a shame.
I'm in two minds with that, because years ago I had a memory of visiting a Norfolk farmer, and he took out this port, which was 1929. It had been sitting in his cupboard in a decanter for about 4 months. And I swear
excellent.
the wine was absolutely delicious. I swear. I mean, it was very light in colour, and it was ancient. And he didn't know anything about it, but he had a case of the stuff.
Wow.
And this one had been sitting around, and I actually really enjoyed it.
Okay.
I know
well,
you, Graham. That's
Might have been a bit
glasses
different, but
before.
it was still
good for
enjoyable.
you. Good for you. I mean, port is generally robust. Usually, however, you think in terms of the two types of port: tawny port, which you can also get in sort of single year crisis, will age in the barrel before it's bottled. So it's done all its oxidation, mostly. So you can open a tawny port and keep half a bottle of that for weeks and weeks, and if not months.
Yeah.
Vintage port, though, because it's been bottled after only a couple of years maybe in the barrel, it's doing most of its aging in the bottle. And once you've exposed that to the sort of full effects of the open atmosphere, it won't necessarily go off as such, but it will certainly lose a fair bit of perceptible freshness, I think, in 48 hours. So back to the original question about using gas, we've got an argon gas appliance which we will use if we think that the wines will benefit from that before they're shipped out.
I was extremely impressed because I received my wines a few days ago. No different from having pulled the cork on that. You could nothing noticeable that you could detect. So yeah, I was very impressed with that.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Graham.
Yeah, so thoroughly enjoyable. So I'm going to leave you now, and thanks very much again. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
You're welcome, Graham. Thanks. So, have any of you been nibbling alongside the wines? Do let me know what worked for you food-wise, if indeed you have been pairing. No answer came, the stern reply.
I think they've had enough of us now, Tim.
No, eating's cheating, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Where are you going? Are you going anywhere afterwards, or?
Where can we go?
You're not allowed to.
Exactly.
You wouldn't expect any
Where
confession.
can one go? No,
You're gonna have a kitchen
we are
party.
going to cook some food. Exactly, cook some food. That's it. Yeah. No, it's funny. I really like the comments today because I thought the Priorat needed like another probably 7 years at least. So it wasn't ready for drinking for me. So I do love Priorat, but I thought that was a bit fresh. But I like the Barbaresco and the Moussard. Normally with Moussard, I'm not the biggest fan, but this kind of made me think, oh, actually, I could probably get into this again. So I really enjoyed Neil's comment. I thought actually compared to 10 years ago when I last had probably a Hauchard Pierre and that one rather than the normal Chateau Moussard, I was like, oh, actually, I quite enjoyed that. So yeah, there we go. That's my little
takeaway for that. Yeah, good. Okay. Well, unless anyone's got any other comments or questions, I think the time has come probably to say thanks once again, everyone, for participating and getting into the spirit of what we do here. We look forward to seeing you virtually before too long. We've got some nice gigs coming up, so we'll stay in touch. You've had your discount codes, I hope, by email, and we look forward to seeing you once again. So thanks, everyone. Stay safe, look after yourself.
See you for Burgundy.
See you, Natalie. Cheers,
See you in a
guys.
couple of weeks.
Thanks.
Cheers.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Have a nice weekend.
And you. Take care.
Cheerio now. Bye.
Carl, what you saying?